All right, so let's go back to our slides. What? Yep. Hang on. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about impairment. What do I mean about, what's the word impairment mean? Well, if you want to think about it how you might think about it at home, if you're impaired, it means you're not able to function at 100%. If you're sleep impaired, you're too tired to do something, right? You're not operating, okay? You're not operating at 100%. I actually saw a sign on the road the other day that said something about drowsy driving, don't be impaired, which is actually the first time I'd seen one about drowsy versus drinking and driving. But they're now talking about the different studies with high schoolers and college students driving drowsy versus driving and drinking. And that can be just as bad, okay? So that's impaired. It's the same thing, what we're talking about the word impaired here means is if your financial state, if you have an impairment of an asset, the asset is no longer functioning at its full capacity. So if you have an impairment of an asset, you cannot leave it on the financial statements at its full cost. And remember what we said about an asset. You have it on the at cost on your financial statements until you sell it. So why would we have something, what could make something be impaired? Well, you have casualty, it becomes obsolete, or lack of demand. So 2 examples with regards to amusement parks. One, they just tore down the red, blue, and green water slide at Six Flags. And they put up a new water slide. Why did they tear it down? I think there were 2. I think it was lack of demand. Well, actually, I think all 3. I think it kind of was becoming a little obsolete because it was just straight down. And I think there had been some issues with people getting hurt, not badly, but injured slightly. Like my kids didn't like to go on it because it hurt their back. All right. I think other people at different Six Flags or water parks had experienced some type injuries on them as well. So I think it kind of was a little bit of all of them. I don't know if Six Flags had a loss or not because that had been there forever and a day. All right. Another one that is a loss, and it is a casualty and a loss, and it was a big loss. But an amusement park in Ohio, where I grew up, this was a really, really long time ago. But they built a ride back when I was in junior high or high school called the Bat. All right, and the Bat was just like the Batman, such that when the Batman opened, I didn't go on it for like 5 years, and the Bat. Your feet flew up and you went sideways, whatever. Well, within a year, I don't remember if it was the year that it opened or the year after it opened, the Bat flew off its track. All right, and so people were killed, and people on the ground were either killed or injured, but it was a casualty. All right, that roller coaster came down immediately. All right, and so that was a casualty loss on mass proportions, right? So they had $1 million roller coaster that they put up, more than $1 million, I'm sure, that then they had to take down and was a write-off on the books. That's not counting the lawsuits that they also had, I'm sure. So when Six Flags put up the Batman, and it looked exactly the same, I don't care how many years later it was, I was not riding that roller coaster for a long time. Obviously, they fixed whatever in the year, and it was a lot of years because like I said, I was in junior high or middle school. But they fixed whatever that was in those years. And there was a long time before anything like came out. But there was a problem with it. And so they had to write that down. So what do you do when you write something like that? Whether it's casualty, suffered by injury. And do you guys remember also the water park? I think it's in Kansas City. Sledenhausen or something like that. It was the one that had the water roller coaster that goes straight down. And a kid flew off it. And I still won't go on it. Now you're in a cage. I still wouldn't do it. And so there's all sorts of these things that have those, and when those happen, they have to do some type of impairment. So first, when you write something down, you eliminate the accumulated depreciation. Second, you write off the asset. So what does that look like? You have an impairment of an $8.6 million piece of equipment. If an amusement park is writing down $8.6 million piece of equipment, something of a casualty happened on that piece of equipment, unless they're also going to write off accumulated depreciation of like $8 million. All right. So the original ride cost $10.6. when it was opened in 2010, they closed it in 2015. It only had accumulated depreciation of $2 million. So something's up with this ride. All right? It lasted 5 years, but something's up with the ride. So the first thing you do is you take the equipment and accumulated depreciation and you take that off. All right, so you decrease the value of the equipment. So that's easy. It's going to tell you that. The second step, you take the value left, which would be the 8.6, because you take and you're going to suffer an impairment loss. Basically, it's going to show up on your income statement as a loss. And then you write off the equipment. So some type of casualty or possibly, hopefully, preventing a casualty happened on this piece of equipment. If you're going to write off $8.6 million, something happened. So it's pretty straightforward on that loss that you would write off. So now how do we just take care of disposing of assets? All right, we're going to update depreciation up until the point we're disposed, and then we're going to write it off. Two things are going to happen. We're either going to have a gain, or we're going to have a loss, or nothing. If we have nothing, that means the book value equaled exactly what we got for it. Either it's 0 and we got 0, or it was $2,500 and we got exactly $2,500. That's a perfect scenario. So the first thing is, did we get cash? Okay, hopefully we did. If we did, we debit cash, we credit equipment, and we credit accumulated depreciation. Right? If we got more cash than the value, the book value, then we have a gain. So in our example right here, if we got $3,500, we're going to have a gain because our book value was $3,500. So equipment, accumulated depreciation, $3,500. That would have meant we got $2,500. We would have got a gain of $1,000. If, on the other hand, we only got $1,500, we would have had a loss. So that's pretty straightforward. How much money did you get? So now I'm going to walk you through, I think we have 5 multiple choice questions. So don't answer them out loud. Everyone reads at a different pace. So just think through. This is all dealing with equipment. Cedar Fair sold a junior roller coaster at $50,000, and at the end of year 6 is when they sold it. The original equipment was $100 and was depreciated straight line with a 0 residual value over 10 years. So what is the depreciation per year? So just think to yourself, $100,000 cost, residual value of 0, useful life of 10. What is our depreciation expense? Has everybody got a number? It shouldn't need a calculator. All right, what's my number?
10,000.
10,000. 100,000 minus 0 divided by 10. They're all easy math problems, okay? So that's why I said you shouldn't need a calculator. All right, next question. We sold it for, same thing, we sold it for 50,000. So now the question is, what is the book value at the date of the sale? So it doesn't matter what we sold it for, ignore that. The cost was 100,000. We sold it at the end of year 6. What is the book value? So how do we calculate book value? Cost minus accumulated depreciation. How much depreciation would we have calculated by the end of year 6? Remember what depreciation expense was? Okay, so Maria says A. Do we agree? Yes. All right. So 10,000 times 6, we subtract 60,000 from 100. All right. Next one. If we sold it for 50,000, what is our gain or loss? How do we figure out gain or loss? What did I just tell you? We have to look at gain and compare it to what number?
Book value.
Book value. So our book value was
40,000.
40,000. What did we get?
50,000.
50,000. So did we have a gain or a loss?
Again, yes.
a gain of 10. See how easy that was? Okay, using a straight $10,000 number over straight line, right? But that's what you want to be able to do. All right, so journal entry overall, there it is. We would debit cash for $50,000, credit accumulated depreciation for $60,000, get rid of the equipment at the price, and then gain on disposal of $10,000. So equipment goes at its value, accumulated depreciation goes at its value, cash is whatever they gave you, and then you have a gain or a loss. In our example up here, if we sold it for $2,500, we would not have anything, right? Because equipment was $62,500 and accumulated depreciation was $60,000, and so if we would have got $2,500, it just would have been $2,500 and $2,500, so we wouldn't have had any gain. All right, so let's talk a little bit about intangible assets. Okay. Now remember what I said. What did I tell you about intangible assets in the test?
They won't show.
Well, I didn't say they won't show up. There won't be a what kind of thing on the test. They could be on the test. There won't be a what? A problem. You won't have a problem on the test. Intangible assets are things we can't touch. All right? They're usually something like an exclusive asset, exclusive right to do something. That's what an intangible asset typically is. Or some type of operational use. It's very difficult typically to determine the life of an asset when it's intangible. Right. You're usually going to put it down at the price that it costs plus anything it takes to get that one too. Remember we talked about land and building and property? Everything it takes to get it running is the cost. Same with an intangible asset. Everything it takes to get it. All right. And then if you have an intangible asset that you can amortize, it's going to be over either the set value or the life of it. An example of that is a patent. A patent is set at 20 years. But if your patent is only good for 5, you got to amortize it over 5. You can't use 20 years if it's only a 5-year patent life. So here's some examples of things. Trademarks. Trademarks is a symbol, a design, or a logo. You guys see them all the time. Nobody's wearing anything today? Nothing. Nike, right? Nobody has a drink. Usually I have a drink, but, oh, well, actually I have Cardinals. Okay. That's a trademark, right? In order to use those things, it's fallen apart. Used to be now. You have to have exclusive right from like Major League Baseball to sell those things. But McDonald's has trademark, Coca-Cola has trademark. You record it at the cost. They're internally developed. There is no cost. So Coca-Cola has no cost on their trademark. Nike has no cost on their trademarks because they develop them internally. A copyright is different. The legal life is 70 years past the death of the creator. You guys are too young to remember something called Muzak. All right, Muzak used to be what you'd hear in all the elevators and doctors' offices before there was satellite radio. Because you couldn't get radio in doctors' offices and elevators because of the buildings interfering, and there wasn't satellite radio that you could pay for and get in, so the only thing you could listen to and have the right to broadcast without paying somebody was basically Beethoven and Bach. So and we called it Muzak, because all it was the piano or the orchestra playing those songs, and it was horrible. All right, and that's all you got to listen to. But now with satellite radio, you barely ever hear that. But if you ever call a doctor's office and you have the radio on and it's staticky and it's still crappy, which every once in a while you're going, they're not paying for satellite radio. Okay, it's basically what it is. And you get to amortize that because it's 70 years. There are legal battles all the time over who has the copyright to do things. The Beatles, I have them ongoing because there's how many Beatles left? There's one Beatle left. Well, it's not two. There's two. Ringo's still around. Forgot him. All right, so there's 2 Beatles left, but John Lennon gave his stuff to Yoko, and that caused problems. And then there's problems with Michael Jackson's a lot, and who owns Michael Jackson's rights. Amortization is the same as depreciation, except for you can't depreciate something that doesn't have a physical touch, so you amortize it. Patents and licensing. So patent is an exclusive right by the government to sell or manufacture something. All right, a patent, you include the purchase price and anything you had to maybe legally defend it. Patents can be over anything, but the most common one that we talk about a lot of times is like drugs. All right, so when a new drug comes out, if you can't get a generic, that's because there's a patent on it. And when the patent expires, what happens to that drug? Everybody sells it, all right, and the price drops. But as long as the patent's there, that's when the price is so expensive, because only one person can sell it. And if you ever look at a drug that is mass produced, so you can buy it at Target and you can buy it at Walmart or whatever, it will always say something like, if you buy Tylenol, the generic of Tylenol will say, compared to the active ingredients of Tylenol. Because all the other companies that produce it do not have the formula. They've dissected Tylenol and made it as close to the active ingredients, but it's not the exact formula. Some people swear by generics. Some people, I mean, there's some generics I'll take, but there's a couple things I will not take the generic of. And I was one of those moms, I did not give my kid generics. I don't know why, I always gave them, whatever the doctor said, give them Tylenol, I would give them Tylenol. Now, over the counter, prescriptions I always gave them, but over the counter, I was just one of those, I don't know, that's just what it is. Licensing is going, it's limited permission to have like the computer. Can you use Microsoft and not buy a license to use it? It used to not be that bad. But once computers got hooked up and the internet was such, they know if you're using it now. And they really can limit what you have. When I worked at Mallinckrodt, they would come out and audit sites. And it was like $12,000 per time they found it on a computer without a license. Oh, it was astronomical. And like when I was at Reuben Brown, we had 5 licenses to run Microsoft Access. So if you weren't using it, you got it taken off. I mean, now it doesn't matter. Now you get site licenses because Microsoft can monitor a site because you're connected to the internet. All right. Technology and assets and franchises. Franchises are used, McDonald's, those type of things are franchises. Some can be owned by McDonald's, some can be owned as a franchise. Just to give you an idea of what those can run, years ago, when I was at Mallinckrodt, a friend of mine came back from Arizona and said, oh my gosh, we got to open this company. It was great. She was a vegetarian. They just had all these different types of noodles, and you got to go by and put whatever you want on them, and you could pick and choose, and we got to open it. It was called Noodles and Company, right? We got a few of those here. We looked at it because we didn't have any here, and it was $1 million to open. You had to open 3. And that only included the training and all their stuff to open the store. It did not include the store. It did not include the building. It did not include the property. Nothing. It just included how they run their store, their name of their store, and anything that had the name Noodles and that type of stuff that went with it. So needless to say, we didn't open one. But somebody did, right? Someone came into St. Louis with money and opened at least 3. There's more than 3 of them here. All right. And then the last one is goodwill. All right. I told you better not tell me it's a store. Goodwill is when you pay more than the fair market value of an asset. So you go in and you buy another company and you pay more than what it's technically worth. Why are you paying more than what it's worth? Reputation. All right. What does the company offer? It offers something that nobody else does. It offers a name that nobody else does. You're paying more because you believe that company has something above and beyond, and so you're going to be willing to go and pay more. It's an intent. It's only purchased goodwill. You cannot get goodwill if you don't buy it. All right? As a trade, no goodwill. Its impairment is written down, so if something happens to the name, Wendy's, someone found a thumb in their chili. Turned out it was a person's thumb, but they found a thumb at the first part. Could they write down their goodwill? Yeah. You didn't hear that? It was her husband's thumb. I mean, that's just moronic, right? It was a year ago. It was like last winter. Huh?
It wasn't too far back.
No, it wasn't too far back. It was like last spring. They went through the drive-through, and then they came back and said she found a thumb in her chili. It hit the news. And so what happened to their stock and everything goes down. Technically, it could have had an impairment on their goodwill because it would have had a huge effect on Wendy's if it would actually been true. But The dumb part about this is her husband had cut off the top of his thumb earlier that day or the day before. It was fresh. But how did they not think that that was going to be found out? And they put his thumb in her chili.
They put it in there?
They put,
Planted it and then tried to
yes.
get money or something?
They planted it and then tried to get the money. And how they wouldn't have thought that anyone would not have noticed that her husband was missing a thumb, I'm not really sure.
Was it like his whole arm?
I don't think it was a whole thumb. I think it was just a piece of thumb. Right. No, people don't think. You know, now in the end, was McDonald's hurt by the coffee incident? Remember that every place you go now says coffee could be hot, right? Which kind of seems dumb. But the original case, which people don't realize, the coffee that was spilt on the woman that sued McDonald's, well, it was I can't remember the exact temperature, but it was over like 100. I mean, it scalded her. She had second-degree burns. So that's why she sued. That's why now they have all these signs, but it was excessively hot when it spilled on her in the drive-thru. So she had a reason to sue. You should not get second-degree burns. But now they got CYA on every drive-thru in every place that sells coffee, right? And so they did not really suffer. I'm not going to say it out loud because I'm a professor, but you don't know what CYA stands for? One of you guys want to tell them? You don't know what it is either? Yeah. Okay. So, but it can be written down if it becomes impaired. So, what does it look like if we actually have an impairment an asset that we can amortize? Amortization. You were asking Faja, what do we do? It's very straightforward. Okay. You take the cost and you divide it by the number of years. There's no residual value or anything. It's just cost divided by the life. And so it would be amortization expense and accumulated amortization. All right. It's very straightforward. Your homework problem is very straightforward on it. All right. That is that, and knowing what what intangible assets are, knowing what goodwill is, because that's really the only one. Knowing that you can only do it with limited life, that's the stuff you need to know about intangibles. All right? To have a limited life, goodwill is above fair market value, journal entry for amortization. That's it. And there's a summary there comparing tangible and intangible assets. I can go back. Okay. I keep talking, but I'll go back. There are 2 journal entries with this chapter. All right. One of them is called fixed asset turnover. It is the same as asset turnover. The only difference is you are only looking at fixed assets. Fixed assets, what do you think that sounds like?
Property, plant, equipment.
Yep, because that's what we dealt with in this chapter, right? Those assets you can't move. All right. So fixed asset turnover ratio is revenue divided by average fixed assets. The only difference between this and asset turnover is now it's average fixed assets instead of average assets. It's the only difference. Why do we want to see that? We want to see how we're using our property, plant, and equipment to generate revenue, not all of our assets to generate revenue. That's the only difference. All right? So Cedar Fair, do they have a lot of fixed assets? Absolutely. So they had revenue of $1.2 million. But look at their fixed assets. Their assets are 1.5 and the two are both on 1.5. So if you look, their fixed asset turnover ratio is 0.8. It's almost 1. Look at the Six Flags is 1.05. Facebook's is 3.7. What's the difference? Yeah, Facebook doesn't have, they don't have fixed assets compared to their revenue. Whereas these 2 companies have it's much or more in fixed assets than they do in revenue. Yeah. Well, think about it. Most assets ratios we actually want to be high, right? So Facebook is actually based on their fixed assets. They're generating a ton of revenue, but they don't need fixed assets. Here, Six Flags is actually doing a little better job with they're almost a 1-to-1 ratio on using their fixed assets to generate revenue. Here they have more fixed assets and they're not generating as much revenue from them. So you do want it to be higher. All right, and this just talks about, we're not going to go through it, but it just talks about impacts of depreciation and the fact that depending on how, I already talked about, depending on which depreciation method you use is going to affect your outcome. And so different companies using different depreciation method is going to give you different results, just like inventory methods. So when we looked at the financial statements for Landry's, and when you look at the financial statements for Home Depot to do your annual report, that's all in the notes to the financial statements. So a true investor, someone that has money that's going to put it in a company and not just buy little pieces of stock like you and I do right now, they're going to look at those notes because they can't really compare one company to another if they don't really understand what inventory method and what depreciation method they're using, because they can't look and be like, man, their net income is really low. Well, maybe they're using double declining and maybe they're using LIFO and they're trying to make it low. That would have a big impact. Okay, so the problem that I was going to do